The breakdown in budget negotiations goes on as the new year looms. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Things are not looking great in Illinois these days, and we're going to talk about it with some people who have watched the situation unfold for, in some cases, many years. Speaking of which, Charlie Wheeler is back. Charlie is Director of Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Before his 20 years doing that, longtime reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Charlie, welcome back.
It's nice to be here.
Okay.
Could we maybe talk about the Cubs?
There was good news in 16. Bruce Rushton is also here. Bruce from the reporter with the Illinois Times here in Springfield.
Always a pleasure.
Welcome. Okay, budget negotiations or lack thereof. There's bickering going on. The Republicans are attacking the Democrats. The governor is saying that the Democrats don't want to bring a budget. The Democrats say it's up to the governor to propose a budget, and he's canceled the meetings. So it's almost like in the Vietnam era trying to figure out in negotiations what shape the table is. Charlie, where are we as the stopgap budget that is running much of state government right now is due to expire at the end of December?
Where are we? Well, we're really bad off. I was trying to think of something that would pass the censors. Yeah, and the reason is, it's not that it's rocket science. It's not that we can't figure out, if we want to do all this stuff, we're going to need more money. It's basically who's going to take the blame. Everybody who looks at this realizes you can't do it by cuts. I mean, mathematically you could. You could say, okay, next year we're not going to fund K-12 education at all. That'll save us enough money to maybe deal with the deficit. We're not going to do that. And so we're going to have to figure out how to raise revenue. And so all this skirmishing back and forth between the governor and his minions and the legislative leadership, mostly House Speaker Michael Madigan, also Senate President John Cullert, and both Chicago Democrats, is trying to figure out who is going to take the blame for the inevitable tax increases. And in my perspective, as you say, I've watched this for a long time, we've not had a governor who has campaigned nonstop and has kind of neglected to govern, in the sense of all of this anti-Madigan rhetoric, all of this attacks on individual legislators, this misrepresentation of Madigan's position on tax increases. It really makes it hard. You're poisoning the well. And so who is going to take the blame? When all is said and done, if we're to save the state, members of both political parties are going to have to vote for additional revenues, and the governor is going to have to sign the bill. So at the end of the day, everybody is going to own it. And the sooner that people decide to put aside all this venomous partisan nonsense and get down to doing the people's business, the better off we'll all be. And so that's my rant for this afternoon.
Let me
Go ahead. Bruce, you're the ranter-in-chief, Bruce. So.
Well, I mean, look, there's no reason to believe that this is going to be addressed anytime soon, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we're here 2 years from now, the next gubernatorial election, talking about lack of a budget. I mean, the politics of it align such that there's no sign of softening on either side of these positions, and that's been true for the last 2 years. Why would this change? I mean, I see no reason why it would, and so.
Well, other than the needs of the state, the needs of the social service agency, the needs of the universities that
went
a year without funding,
which hasn't added up to a ball of anything as far as these folks are concerned, because they have not. Everybody, all these things you just mentioned, there's been some deep suffering there. The school systems are terribly underfunded. The state has essentially abdicated its responsibilities in the areas of social services and education and many other areas.
Well, the governor will say, we funded education.
No, the governor's wrong. The governor's wrong. And the thing about
I'm saying even in the first year, he signed one bill of all the appropriations bills, and that was for schools, so that
because it was politically expedient.
Yeah,
right.
so that the parents
that's
go crazy
the same
with their
reason
kids
why
at home.
K-12 was funded for the full FY17, whereas higher education's got jack.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that the governor is as smart as he says he is. And if he will follow through on what he promised to do early on, he said, I'm willing to do unpopular things, I'm willing to
take arrows.
Yeah, I'll take the arrows. If he means those things, then he would put forth a plan that folks could, and say, forget about what, the four tops are saying, and say, here is a blueprint to get us started, a reasonable thing that can pass muster both politically and economically and do them that. But I think he likes it this way.
Well, he continues to say that we need reforms, but let me crystallize on something that Charlie said when he talked about misrepresenting where Mike Madigan is. Well, the governor has said, Mike Madigan said, I don't know, it's close to a year ago already, at a City Club of Chicago meeting, I don't want to make a headline today, but maybe we'll need a tax increase. Maybe you would start at about where we were, which was a 5% personal income tax, which is now 3.75. And then we can start from there and maybe go in either direction. So he talked about going up or down. The Republican Party immediately put out many attacks on Mike Madigan saying he wants to raise your taxes to 5%, a massive tax increase. And the governor, in recent times and even then, has said Mike Madigan wants to raise your taxes back to 5% or higher. So he said that this week when he was in Springfield, and I said, well, that's not what Mike Madigan said, because we keep saying, and the governor's like, okay, but what do you really think? And then it's clear that whoever proposes that tax increase will be attacked by the other side, or at least if the Democrats do, which the governor is demanding that they say, what revenue do you want, that the attacks will come. The other part of this is the governor says when there's a website called bossmadigan.com, and Republican Party of Illinois, which is largely funded by Bruce Rushton, keeps attacking more Democrats, those interested in running for governor or that they want to align with Madigan before the new term starts in January. And the governor says, that's not me, I'm not the Republican Party, and people should be able to understand that there's politics. This is where we are, and what does that mean?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. The well is so poisoned that it's going to be very difficult. We enacted an income tax under a Republican governor, Richard Ogilvie. We raised the rate temporarily under a Republican governor, Jim Thompson. We did it again at the end of Thompson's tenure. We kept those higher rates under Republican governor, Jim Edgar. And it was because there was an understanding that we need to do this, and the temptation to go all bonkers and be nasty, venomous, political, and let's get the other guys, let's really smear them. They resisted that. They behaved like adults. They were what are called structured roll calls, a certain number of Republicans, a certain number of Democrats. The Republican governor signed these tax increases, first enacting an income tax, then extending and keeping it. The lone exception was the 2011 temporary tax increase passed solely by Democrats, signed by Democrat Pat Quinn. But the sense or the civic commitment to understand that sometimes tough votes are needed, and instead of jockeying, trying to figure out how we can screw the other guy with the tough vote for the sake of the good of the state, we're going to put aside all that nonsense, and we're going to actually do what needs to be done. And as an aside, because they were structured roll calls, the leaders in both Republican and Democratic parties would put on people who weren't particularly vulnerable, legislators in relatively safe districts. And if you go back and look at the record of the people who voted for enacting the income tax or maintaining it, increasing it, whatever, the people who voted yes got elected at a higher rate the next time they were up than the people who voted no. And as a matter of fact, the people who voted for that temporary income tax increase in the lame duck session, 5 years ago now, the people who were on the ballot next time who voted yes, they all won in November. No Republican beat a Democrat.
But Bruce, in the age of Twitter and Facebook and attack ads and this infusion of funding in Illinois, particularly from Governor Rauner, but Democrats are obviously going to try to meet this, and with union support and rich people support on the Democratic side. Is it possible to vote for a tax increase these days and not be lambasted from day one?
Look, you're in public office. You're going to get lambasted no matter what you do. And Charlie's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the way the districts are, this isn't a problem for the legislature per se. I mean, there are plenty of, I would think that there's enough votes in the General Assembly to enact a tax increase, or better yet, tax reform. Because I think the problem here, and everybody kind of knows it, is that we've got a really backward tax system. We don't have a tax on services. We entirely exempt retirement income, no matter how much retirement income you have.
Which most states don't.
Which most states don't. I mean, I'm from Washington State, which has no income tax, and my parents are very, very much against taxes. But even they say, you guys don't tax services. That's nuts, and it is nuts. And so, but the thing is that there is enough votes in the legislature to actually do meaningful things. The problem here, frankly, is the governor. He's obstructionist.
Okay.
He's been an anarchist.
Well, let me, being the devil's advocate and hearing the governor speak since the election, he says Illinois' whole governmental system is bad, so we need these reforms. The Democrats have said they're non-budgetary and they shouldn't be linked, but the governor says we must have reform, which includes workers' compensation, make the state more business-friendly, bring more jobs. Workers' compensation, lower the costs. Clearly, he now wants term limits too. He wants property tax freeze. There used to be 44 things. He wants to limit the control of unions. He wants local governments, at least at some points, he has pushed to let local governments not collectively bargain with their employees, not pay prevailing wage on projects. He says all of these things are what other states are doing. We need to do them, and he will not sign more money unless we get these things. He continues to say that 2 years into his term.
Well, then, yeah.
But what he says, that's absolute. They must compromise with me, and I sense out there that the millions of dollars spent demonizing Mike Madigan has made a lot of people think this. Well, why don't you just compromise, Democrats, and do some of that which this governor wants?
Well, that's terrific. He's gone from 44 non-starters now to, a half dozen or so. I mean, look, the art of governing is the art of achieving the possible. It's not, good government is government that recognizes there are political realities and understands that you have to compromise. And you're exactly right about Madigan. The only politician, he's probably the most unpopular politician in the state of Illinois. Big deal. He's also the guy you got to play ball with, because that's just the way it is. And so screaming and stamping and throwing temper tantrums, which is essentially the equivalent of what Rauner's been doing for the last 2 years, is not accomplishing anything. It's not making the state more business friendly. It's doing something exactly the opposite, because businesses are I'm of the school of thought that businesses look at state government in Illinois and say, you guys can't get your act together. It's only getting worse as time progresses. And why would I do business in Illinois knowing that somewhere down the road we're going to get shellacked by a huge tax increase, and there's no certainty. Business wants certainty above and beyond everything else. Now, Rauner has said some stuff that actually is very good, particularly when it comes to property taxes. Property taxes in Illinois are ridiculous. I think there's some agreement on workman's compensation. But when he starts going over into this stuff like collective bargaining and term limits, and that stuff it just ain't going to happen.
Well, he certainly, I've always
said
he wants to be like Wisconsin and Scott Walker, but he had a Republican legislature, and in Illinois we have a Democratic legislature.
Well, and I would say some of the stuff would be related. If you could suddenly do away with collective bargaining, bust all the unions, you'd be able to pay workers less. You wouldn't have to pay the going rate for highway construction. You could save a lot of money, make a lot of the fat cats happy. But on the other hand, how does a local property tax freeze help the state per se? You know how much of the roughly $27 billion in property taxes get collected? You know how much goes to the state?
Zero.
Yeah,
it's the same thing with term limits. What the governor will say is businesses will look at Illinois and see that our government is changing and want to come here. That's
right.
I'm just telling you what he says.
And it's all aimed at Mike Madigan. So let's do a little math. The soonest we could get term limits on the ballot would be 2018. They take effect in 2019, so that means in 2029, anybody who was here in 2019 is out the door. Madigan was born in April of 42. Do the math. In January of 2029, he'll be pushing 87 years old.
I understand.
And probably still speaker.
Well, he may be. He may be.
Understand
if
your
he is,
point.
God bless him.
Right. Well,
But if you go back and assume, well, how about if in 2007 we would have had term limits then? and look at 2017, there'd only be roughly something like 36 House members out of 118 who would still be here. In other words, 85 House members have already imposed their own term limits, or they've lost a re-election bid, and so there is pretty much a turnover rate.
Yeah, but well, it's interesting. The governor says he doesn't look at polls when he wants to say that, but then he'll say on term limits, well, it's very popular and both sides
Oh, of course
should
it's
pass
popular.
it. But
I mean, so would
yeah.
free ice
On the
cream
other
on
hand,
Sunday be.
people often like their own legislator, and they like their own legislator to stay in office because they know how to get things done.
Yeah, but I mean,
we'll see.
Look, but you're talking about property tax freeze. I mean, I'm of the opinion, we don't need a property tax freeze. We need a rollback on something. They're already too high. If you freeze at a level where we're at now, it's too high. And the problem here, again, is that you've got such a narrow slice of the economic pie that you're drawing all your money from, and that's not wise. And
Yeah,
so
you're talking about tax reform
right,
again,
exactly. And
like
so
services.
yeah. So what do you do if you freeze property taxes? Well, you start taxing services or retirement income or some of the others, or some mix and match
No,
sort of thing.
but if you freeze property taxes, who you really stiff are the school districts. You freeze property taxes, and under Rauner's plan, they would be frozen for home rule units too.
Right.
But on the other hand, home rule units have the ability to slap on sales tax, to come up with some other creative tax. Cities and counties.
Sure.
School districts don't. They could have more bake sales maybe.
But you change the laws. I mean, what you do is you do what we expect our elected
Well,
representatives to do.
and the way to deal with property taxes, 60% of the property taxes go to schools. If the state were to put in what the national average is in terms of the state's contribution, roughly the national average, about 45% of local school funding comes from the states. In Illinois, it's like 33%.
Yeah, understood.
That chunk of money from the state would enable property taxes to go down.
And I will say, even in his freeze, he would let local voters increase property taxes. Of course, we know how that fares in this day and age. Let me say, the governor was at the Department of Corrections this week, and this is where some of the discussion about the budget came with reporters, but they also talked about they've trained like 13,000 people, their employees and their contractors and people that work in the prisons on mental health training, which they kind of had to do. They're very proud of this. He wants inmate population to be down by 25% by the year 2025. They did say that it's down about 7% so far. So I think that this is one issue where the governor and Democrats seem to be in concert. Prison reform, sentencing reform, let's change the laws and make them a little more effective. It's not a budgetary thing other than fewer prisoners means fewer staff.
It is.
But
It's
so it does help.
Yeah.
So obviously it helps. But here is one situation where at least if people think our government is entirely non-functional, it does seem to be functioning in this way.
Well, and I would give Governor Rauner very high marks for the reforms he's trying to do in criminal justice. It makes an awful lot of sense not to keep nonviolent offenders locked up for a long time. It makes an awful lot of sense to provide programming so that people who have substance abuse problems, either with drugs or alcohol, actually get rehabilitated in the prison, so they don't come back.
He talks about this with great
Oh, no,
sincerity.
and I give him a lot of credit for it.
So we'll see and he also
and all that stuff that passed the legislature, though, it passed without being tied to term limits or a property tax freeze
That's true.
or right to work or any of these
it was also
ideological
one of the big
issues.
marks of Rod Blagojevich's lack of tenure was his lack of work ethic, which means that he let clemency cases, prisoners asking to have their sentences reduced or to be pardoned, just go. And the governor just came out a few days ago and said that he had, eliminated the clemency backlog. He didn't. I think it was something like 4% of cases that people asked and he allowed. So it's not as much as some other governors in some other states, but at least he eliminated the backlog and people aren't waiting years and years anymore.
Well, because he's got time on his hands because he's not doing the other stuff he's supposed to be doing. So,
Well, there is that, if you want to look at it that way.
It's a backhanded compliment. But yeah, he has done very well on criminal justice. He wins rightly, high marks for folks. I mean, one thing that's happening here that I'm going to be very interested in watching is the fee requests from lawyers who settled the mental health case. They've asked for $6 million. I mean, that's a chunk of change. And so this is a combination of private firms and a prisoner rights advocacy group, Uptown People's Law Center. That's pending now. And so that's, I think that's going to be a bit of a sticker shock. I don't think they're going to get $6 million, but that's almost unprecedented, I think.
Speaking of money in our state, the lottery, there was a story in the Chicago Tribune that of the scratch-off games that people buy these tickets and there's so much promotion of. Bruce, I think you're up on this. I think the number was like in 23, was it 23 games that they didn't pay the grand prize or something? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's the old saw, sucker born every minute to some extent. I mean, look, lottery games have always been a long shot there. If you're going to gamble and have a hope of winning the lottery, it's probably not one of the things that you do if you do
percentage-wise.
Yeah, percentage-wise.
Like
but boy, the percentages are really bad when you don't sell any winning tickets. And so what they were doing is they were, particularly on the high stakes games, there was one where it was like, if you win, you get $30,000 a year for the rest of your life, and so a single ticket for that cost $30. So what they did is they printed more tickets than they could ever possibly sell, sold them for a while, and then just pulled the game before anybody won the grand prize.
Okay, I mean, we don't know that there's anything like illegal or.
Does that sound right to you?
Well, I know. I think the legislature is going to, maybe have some hearings, and we're going to take a look at this. And the governor hasn't been a fan of the private company that was running the lottery anyway.
No, and
But it certainly doesn't help ticket sales when you have a giant Chicago Tribune story saying people aren't winning as they promised.
Yeah, and to be sure, I mean, several states don't pay out the grand prize through whatever reason. Florida, I think, stands out in that they pay all the. I mean, that's one state that almost stands alone. But Illinois is way out of whack in terms of nobody wins, and so you're right. I mean, that's not going to do real well for lottery sales. It's been a bad administration for the lottery all the way around. For a while, they weren't paying winners because they said they couldn't afford to do it. Now it turns out, well, we can afford not to pay the winners because there are no winners. So
yeah, and it strikes me that to be on the up and up with the people who play the lottery, you should keep going until all the winning tickets are claimed.
Yep.
Because if you wanted to have a conspiracy theory, you could say this private vendor said, okay, here's the winning number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I printed up 1 million tickets, and guess what? None of them say 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, well, that one would hope that's not the case.
Well,
I don't know, and I guess there probably is an accounting method to find out if people want to, and we'll see if the legislature looks into this or.
Well, like Bruce said, buying a lottery ticket as your retirement plan is probably not good financial planning.
Yeah, and understood. Speaking of something wrong in the financial world, well, Aaron Schock, former congressman, former state legislator, who is now, I guess, 35, I believe, but from Peoria, came to federal court in Springfield this last week and pleaded not guilty to charges that he used various methods, reimbursement for auto mileage from his campaign, from the government, and other things to the tune of something like $100,000 that he wasn't supposed to get. He denies any wrongdoing. I guess he made the reporters, I wasn't covering it myself that day, but wait in the cold for about an hour so that he could speak for like 11 seconds saying we didn't do anything wrong and we know we'll be right.
Hey, so, but that's part of the job.
That is part. Was
I
complaining? I wasn't even in the cold.
Yeah.
Well, look.
So Aaron Schock, does he have a chance to get off of this? He's spent a lot of the remaining campaign money he had on lawyers, and he has, I'm sure, good lawyers.
Well,
and he says he didn't do anything wrong.
He did say that he's confident that justice will prevail. So, I mean,
we'll see.
And in terms of speaking all of 11 seconds, that's probably 11 seconds longer than his defense team really wanted him to speak. If you're facing these kinds of charges, there's 2 words you say.
No comment.
Thank you. Yeah.
Don't encourage them, Bruce. That's it. I wanted to, 2018, we've talked about that in terms of the budget. It's a long way off. But, we are only a year away from filing for the next election when Governor Rauner is expected to file for another term at the end of 2017, which will be the primary of 2018 and then the general. We've heard some Democratic names. One of them is J.B. Pritzker, who is of the Hyatt Hotel family, and he has talked about running for governor, and then the Republican Party has already put out a robocall linking him to Governor Blagojevich because Blagojevich mentioned Pritzker on tapes that maybe he could raise money for this U.S. Senate seat. And Pritzker is accusing the Rauner people of saying, why are you wasting your time when you can't pass a budget in 2 years? We do have a continuous campaign, don't we?
Yeah. I mean, maybe, when you have a Boss Madigan website, that's helpful, isn't it?
Yeah. I will also mention that from Central Illinois, from Macoupin County, State Senator Andy Minar is also being mentioned as one of the possible candidates for governor, but there's also Chris Kennedy, who is Robert F. Kennedy's son, State Senator Daniel Biss, and some of these come from a Greg Hines column in Chicago, Crane Chicago Business. Sherry Bustos and Robin Kelly, 2 members of Congress, There's an alderman, Lisa Madigan is still in the mix, although it looks less likely all the time, and a couple other people. State Treasurer Mike Ferks, if I didn't mention him. Is it too early to talk, or people by the state fair this year? In the summer, we should have Democrats coming forward, jockeying for position for governor and everything else.
Well, I think Ronald's going to be tough. I mean, I don't think it's going to be. I think the Democrats will have a difficult time winning statewide in the governor's race. I mean, it's not just the money, but I think Ronald does have. I think he's more popular than Madigan is, and
That's saying a lot.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you take it where you can get it. Biss and Menard, I think, are very well regarded. They both seem knowledgeable, articulate.
And they're not wealthy, so they'd have to get their money from somewhere else.
They're not wealthy, but do they have the charisma? I mean, this is, and that's what it's kind of going to take. It's being smart and well spoken isn't going to put you over the top.
We have a situation where the governor basically has unlimited resources.
Well, he made $188 million in 2015 according to his tax returns, which is something like more than $500,000 a day.
That $185 million could have paid the entire cost of the Illinois General Assembly, the entire legislative branch. The last time we had a full budget in FY15, the legislative branch cost $120 million. So he could have covered the whole thing and still had $65 million. But when you have that kind of funding, you look on the Democratic side, can Kennedy match those funds? Probably. Pritzker? Certainly.
Well, Pritzker is worth more than Rauner. He's
yeah.
worth like $3.4
But on the
billion.
other hand, a guy like Mike Frericks, who's done a good job as treasurer. He's a young guy. He's attractive. He's well spoken.
He's 6'8".
So that you have a
That's
cage
true.
match?
Or a congressman like Sherry Bustos, who is a rising star in
they'd have to
Democratic
get money from all
Where
kinds of
does the
sources.
money come from? Particularly when you're going to be subjected to 24/7 negative attacks, smearing your record, distorting everything you've ever done to make you out to be almost as bad as Mike Madigan, for whom you're a puppet.
We're gonna have to end it, unfortunately, but I've enjoyed the conversation as usual. Charlie Wheeler, Bruce Rushton, thank you for your thoughts. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.